Welcome to those that you have joined us today. We've got three talking heads here, and two of them who you definitely want to be listening to in Matt and Hung, dear friends from over many, many years. And it's nice to bring us all together to have a pretty punchy topic today. And who would have thought if you would have written this down on a piece of paper before today and said, Matt's going to be doing this from Abu Dhabi. I'm going to be sitting inside a bank's office with this background behind me because I've just finished a customer meeting and did that. And then Hung's going to be with a fresh laptop with a fresh suit on, ready for today's session. You know, this trio of probabilities, if Ladbrokes had a bet on it, would be incredibly good odds. But I want to throw it around for people that don't know you already. We'd love to just get a bit of background history on each of you. So Matt, why don't we flip to you first?
Yeah, so my name is Matt Buckland. I am a recruiter and a recruitment manager, team leader, all of that stuff for about the last 25 years now. So I've worked for companies large, small, scaling, declining, at all stages of their lives. But a leader of teams and just generally thinking about recruitment for 25 years now, even more probably. And now recently, as you said, followed my my partner, Sandy, over to Abu Dhabi, where she got a job, and I am busy cleaning the house we live in currently as I look for another job. So,
this is the accurate allocation of labour, mate.
Absolutely.
Manual work. That's what you're for.
Considering the purchase of a ride-on mop.
That's a dream, though. That's a dream. I'm telling you, they look like a lot of fun. We do in-store working with one of our customers each year because they ask their partners to do it, and we go in there. And the first question I asked is, "Can I go on the ride-on thing that waxes the floor in between the aisles?" But no, you need a license for that and all the boring stuff. But I reckon I can find one on Temu somewhere and drive it down a high street. Hung, flipping to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Great to be here. So my name's Hung Lee. I'm kind of very much echo sort of Matt's journey, really, although I bailed out of recruiting as an operator. Thankfully, because my incompetence would never carry me to the heights that Matt has achieved. But I still am a recruiter at heart. Riding mops. But these days I do more like community and content, I think, so I curate a newsletter, do a lot of podcasts, just try and make sure information is circulating in the right places for our ecosystem.
Yeah, and we're going to start, and we're not going to talk about the same echo chamber topics of AI. I think this is the one thing we really wanted to step out from as part of this episode. There might be some elements where we end up accidentally stepping into the echo chamber, as we all do. It's a subject we all need to be speaking about, but actually it's not just this considerable drive forwards where I kind of coined it in the post of like this kind of enlightenment period, that there's just constant progress, and by adopting AI you're moving forwards, and we should all be doing it in every single way and in every single place. And I think we want to challenge that status quo, but also think about where there are still practical use cases right now. So that's maybe the practical use case where we might accidentally step into the echo chamber just a little bit, but it's an overplayed topic, but still not played enough. So I think, Matt, like we stimulated this conversation, we started to have it initially, and I'd love to just get your view broadly on where you see AI, given your background, given your history in hiring across tech, across all sorts of areas.
Yeah. So look, for me, I think recruitment has a problem that probably doesn't exist in other industries. And that's that with every new and subsequent piece of technology comes along, there is someone who's trying to shoehorn that into what we do as recruiters. It ties into a number of different things, but the narrative that recruitment is broken is always there, and this will fix it, whatever this is at that stage. So being old and having done this a few times, the hype cycle I've been through several times now is that this will change recruitment. I was reminded recently that we should all by now be interviewed by that robotic head that company had. Remember that head with the rear projection? Found the company, the head is not on their website anymore. So it's things like this. We all needed big data. We all needed to be in the cloud. We all needed to be mobile. We all needed whatever subsequent thing it is. My issue with it is, and this is in the danger of me sounding like a Luddite at this point, right? I wear Meta glasses half of my day. I have AI strapped to my face. I use ChatGPT. I've got agents looking up for cheap flights all the time. I use it. I'm a geek for this stuff. But we have to understand in the area where we are that the discourse often is anti-recruiter. So that means that this tool will replace you. And the person saying that tool is not a recruiter, has not been in recruitment, does not understand what recruitment is properly. And there's a danger that we get into things like poor governance. We get into hallucination here is just as bad for people as it is in legal or in finance. We're going to end up in situations. For me, I'd rather be a voice of concern and say to people, just hold off, wait, look at it in small portions and adopt where you can, rather than being the gung-ho, this will replace you vibe that I get normally from people who are selling the thing.
Yeah, very true. And Hung, actually, like I think you put this. We were maybe 2.5 years ago now. This is when Dali had just come out, and it was like there were really early, weird-looking, grainy images of humans, not where we are now in like Hollywood grade movies. And like you said something around like the artisanal effect on this area of like standardization. I think that's part of what this is, right? If we are all adopting something similar, how much do we move into just standardization meets standardization? Have you seen like that? Because I think you were really kind of prophetic in thinking of it in that way 2.5 years ago. Have you seen it played out like that in the conversations that you have across the world?
I think there's two things. I mean, to underline Matt's point, definitely the case that recruitment is broken, quote unquote. But there's a really interesting post that Bill Boorman, our good friend Bill Boorman, posted. And he said, yeah, recruitment should be broken. And it was like, which is a super interesting provocation. But it makes a very valid point because, maybe it is not a solvable problem per se, because we are talking about basically trying to build our tribe and get someone in sort of from out group to in group. That journey is difficult because it's so contextual and it's very anthropological experience, right? And we've kind of bled all of that anthropology out because we want to try and reduce human beings into scorecards essentially. And if you think about what KPIs are, that's a reductionist approach, reducing human activity into numbers. So we've gone down this quantification route, thinking that that's going to produce these outcomes that are better for us. Maybe it marginally will do, but fundamentally, there's a lot of human interaction, human collaboration that's very difficult to quantify because it is chemical, right? It's biochemical, maybe even spiritual. So stuff that's really, really difficult to document and quantify. So is it really broken or is it just the nature of things? In which case, maybe we shouldn't change the language about being broken and just accept that it is this process of getting to know someone. So underline that point with Matt. But to answer the question about whether AI ends up sort of standardizing everything, I think it does. If you look at how if you look at software engineering, it's a classic example. AI is able to produce the optimal sort of code to write a function because the optimal code is going to be the standardized one. Standardization is good, equals good in code, right? Because it means it interlocks and it's interoperable, easy to maintain, it's cleaner, etc., etc. And there is it's not a risk. I think it's actually we can be very confident that the intrusion of AI into the other aspects of work will also have a standardization effect. Now, the question for us down the track is how do you differentiate your business when everything is standardized? And this is, again, coming back to something that Matt mentioned. It probably is going to be that human sort of value added, whatever that is. And I think that will always be amorphous. It will always be difficult to document. Maybe we shouldn't document it, actually, because the documentation itself might corrupt it or it might change it. In the same way that the map is not the world, right? By mapping something, maybe you end up interacting with that artifact, which is the map, but it isn't actually what the reality is. So yes, I think human differentiation will be the differentiator. Maybe that emerges into some artisanal work at some sort of level of the economy, but I suspect it will be a small slice of that economy as the artisanal world currently is. Most people drink.
But then take the artisanal piece of that like example of a coffee shop, but actually think about the artisanal element of, so say you're designing code, right? If everybody is using Lovables of this world, it's really interesting. I don't know if you've seen the subscription and then the cutout rates of each of those platforms as devs come on and off them.
Yeah.
I think, they're currently at a stage where you can build something that's product ready, but if you're in a building like I am today in a regulated business, I think we're a very far cry away from building like your core infrastructure on external products. And then we think about that kind of startup ecosystem and that spark of creativity, which hasn't been realized. And it used to be the definition of AI, right? Do you remember when we used to talk about companies that were talking about AI in recruitment and be like, well, it's not AI, is it? It's machine learning. But actually, advanced machine learning has now been just adopted as AI, and it's now just a global force, because it's not actually in any case that I've seen, like actually learning independently. It's learning in a structured direction, and therefore you still need the human creativity spark to start new businesses up, which is why I think we're seeing so many more startups than we've seen before. We're back in that wave again where actually the number of new startups, the number of investment was like steadily dropping, and now it's absolutely booming again to like pre-COVID levels. And so I think that's part of that artisanal piece, as is within your organization, your ability to shift and change and lead a change management program is a very human activity where you built up layers of trust over a period of time. So I'm kind of for that. And Matt, you touched on something when we spoke before on standardization in terms of, like, I suppose the data that's feeding into AI systems and where that trust is coming from. And maybe that's a little bit misplaced. I'd love to kind of touch on that for the audience.
I have an issue with standardization, because often standardization is to the mean, and the mean is often not the really good stuff. And it might not be the terrible stuff, right? But it just produces a black and white experience. And it's fundamental to me that recruitment, when done well, is idiosyncratic, right? It's strange and unusual and delightful. And if we homogenize everything, if we're just reverting to standards, then what we find is, I have had a standard experience. Like, you go on Google reviews, there's bad reviews, there's happy, wonderful reviews. No one just goes on there and goes, I have had the standard experience I expected. No one writes home about the standard experience. Is that bad? Well, it's going to lift a lot of the dreck will disappear. Because let's be honest, some TA functions don't look like TA functions to me. They look like the order taking, paper shuffling kind of personnel departments of like the 70s. If they die a death, because that can be done, because all they're working is within a framework of rules, boundaries, limitations over here, good. However, it frees us up to do something much, much better at the top end, right? The cube I'm now drawing, this part is, I recently read Will Guidara's book, Unreasonable Hospitality, and I'm obsessed with this now, right? So Will Guidara is a guy who talks about becoming the #1 restaurant in the universe, Michelin-starred restaurant. It follows on from your artisanal coffee example, I think, Sam. He looked at what would be making something unreasonably hospitable towards people. And some of the great examples he had were, they would note down where people parked outside the restaurant. And if their meal went long, they would run out and they would feed the meter so their cars wouldn't go over. Didn't tell them about it. Their car was there. There were people who were having an anniversary. They were worried about a bottle of champagne that they left in the freezer at home. Someone took the keys off them, went to their apartment, took the champagne out of the freezer, put the table properly, bought them flowers and chocolates at home that were waiting for them when they got there. That is unreasonable hospitality. So I think in my continuum of where recruitment's going, we've got definitely a 2-tier, if not more tier system. You've got an unreasonably hospitable version, which is where we are white gloving people into jobs. And what I worry is that the rising tide of AI is going to automate a different turn, where we end up with sort of Morlocks and Eloi over here. You've got happy, lovely people living a lovely life up here, getting the great, beautiful service that feels a lot like the old headhunter vibe in the 80s and early 90s when we talked about that. And then down here, you've probably got, and it sounds trite, but you've probably got gig economy being hired via your mobile, via an AI. Have you got, are you physically able to lift 60 kilograms? Yes, you're in. That kind of stuff. And an AI model is just doing those things, which is that good for recruitment? I don't know. But I know which side of the scale I want to be on.
I think that's right, though. The Eloi and Morlocks, I mean, it's a difficult conception, but at the same time, that bifurcation of recruitment, I think, is kind of inevitable, and it kind of tracks sort of the inbound and outbound experience, in the sense that, if you're a job seeker and you're actively looking for work, guess what? It's a terrible experience. I mean, there's nobody who's ever been a job seeker looking for work and enjoyed it. Where we've had, oh, that was a good experience, is typically when we have been headhunted. And we've been buttered up, and we've had this concierge experience, and of course, it's brilliant. So fundamentally, they're two different sort of directions of energy. You can look at it from an energy point of view. If I'm an applicant, by the way, is also a supplicant. All right. You are also a supplicant, because you are going to apply, and basically you're putting yourself in a position where the employer can say no. Like, you're literally being put forward to be judged. That's really horrible. It's a horrible experience. I don't think that ever improves because of that action. Whereas if you're being sort of, someone's coming at you and you're being sort of pulled in, then of course I feel better. I'm desired. I'm wanted. And I'd love for the entire world to get to the point where more people get desired in that way. Maybe AI can help with that, but I think you're right, Matt. At the current sort of situation, it seems that we're going to have polarization, where you've got a small number of elites that are very high demand. They get billion-dollar sign-on bonuses or whatever, and then everyone else who's basically applying away and getting absolutely nothing, or just trudging through what seems to be in a hostile environment, let's say, in order to get to that, whatever the promised land is being promised us.
Are we not just perpetuating, to Matt, to your point right at the beginning, are we not just amplifying societal disparity with the use of AI in that example, where you've got a privileged few and then the many? I think the other part though here on that experience lens, I actually challenge it. I do think there's some roles where, from a candidate's perspective, your expectation and your buy-in to your employer is the case of an extra dollar per hour. Speak to healthcare organizations in the US, where a care worker will move from one organization to another one that might be 1 mile down the road, and they'll do it for for $1 on the hour. And actually, your experience from moving from that role to another role is quite a transactional experience. So would you expect a transactional experience there? And to use your restaurant example, it's a bit like going to McDonald's, right? McDonald's have now created a universal experience the world over, where the touchscreen is the same. You can put it in whatever language you want. You get the same thing there, and you know what you're getting, and you know it's going to be fast. Versus when you want that concierge service, you're going to a restaurant where you're going to treat you differently. You're going to be in a different environment. They've tailored it for you to have the best possible experience for you to return. And so I think there are a lot of parallels there. And I still think there's a lot of areas where actually there's some good use cases of automation, as well as some AI, but a lot of it's automation. When you look at like UPS and how they got drivers within like 16 minutes. I have Matt Lavery on the show before, and absolutely wonderful story, and served that purpose perfectly. If I think about it in the world of like technical hiring where we sit, I still think there's probably a bifurcation there. And if you would have said there's a bifurcation 2.5 years ago, 3.5 years ago, people would have ran you down the street and said no. Every single hire is needs that concierge service. But actually the balance of applications, again, if it becomes transactional for the candidates, should we respond in a transactional way? Like, if a candidate wants a transaction, can we serve them a transaction? If a candidate wants concierge, can we serve them concierge? It's like maybe a different way of thinking about it. And on, I suppose, the data sets that feed into this, and a lot of the validation, Matt, you shared something with me on the data set in the Philippines of candidates wanting an AI experience more than they wanted an AI experience. I had this on the train today. I got cold called by an AI SDR. And someone in the US taught me a great trick when you've got an AI robot, which is to say something like, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. And then if the AI successfully doesn't go down that rabbit hole and brings you back to the conversation, it's doing a really good job. And it just laughed. It laughed and went, "You must be really interested in that. Anyway, let me tell you more about my product." And
Nice.
like, that was not the experience. And so I think that was another point, Matt. You shared that article with me, and I just thought it was fascinating on, like, do candidates actually want that? Are we basing it on the wrong data set? Maybe share a bit more. I think you should.
Yeah, I think it was a data set that was shared by, again, a vendor. So I always take that with a pinch of salt. It was for Again, bifurcation. It was for call center workers in the Philippines. So that's it's a lower barrier to entry than, what's our biggest thing at the moment? Probably AI engineers up here where you're 10 million sign-ons, right? So if you are looking for that set of people, they're saying that the majority preferred AI, that sort of stuff. They could just do it quickly. It was on demand. They didn't have to wait around. To your point, Sam, extra dollar every hour. Why wouldn't you go that way? It's interesting, though, because one of the biggest things that they sort of skirted around in that data was that the AI put through people who had a preference for AI, but not necessarily scored highest on the test results. So the outlier response was people who had scored really high on the test results. And I found that interesting because a human, certainly hiring managers I've worked with, might over-index on those things versus sort of a readiness and a willingness. But that sort of eagerness was taken into account by the AI. There's another, I mean, the data thing and who owns the data, who owns the discourse is one thing. There was a lovely piece of work in 2023. I think it was Deloitte, don't quote me on it, I'll find out who it was, where they said, do you have confidence in your data? And it was like for governance people. And like 70% said no, their data is not ready for audit and not ready for governance. And you're like, well, that's an insane amount. So what does that mean when you are going to go to a vendor and they're going to say, right, we're going to train on your data, give me your data. Are you confident that that's going to be the thing? That's going to be like, you're going to automate all these processes based on historical training data. Tell me you're confident in that historical training data. Tell me it's even in a usable format. This is one of these things that I always find amazing, is that we end up in TA, someone else will choose to buy a tool. They will give it to us. We will have to use it as TA. It's trained on data that we don't trust. And if we were in the room at the time, TA would be going, don't do that. Don't, because we know that thing. It's like spaghetti in a cupboard, right? Don't touch that because we don't want to know about it. Even if your data's perfect, we still are in this discourse of AI will make things faster. And I question whether speed and efficiency are what we want to go for versus outcomes. So all of what I see at the moment is we're going to find a person for you. And it's like, cool, finding people's easy. We've solved that largely. I can find people. How can I convince them better? Can AI help me do that? Or is that necessarily, to Hung's point, is that the point where we open ourselves up for that delight, that opportunity? Is that spiritual connection? Is that the in-group, the out-group stuff that only a human can do? There's great points for it, and I think it fits in some places, but in other places, I think we need to be really careful around it. And I'd say, get your foundation straight, not skyscrapers built on sand.
We've got to bring it into politics, guys.
Danger. The danger zone. Come on, hit us.
Yeah.
Because we're living in a capitalist system, and every single organization that's a profit-making business there's an embedded imperative for efficiency. All right. Efficiency is simply more profit. It's like doing more of less is basically input, output. I'm making more margin. That's what doing more with less really is. So I think whilst I agree with Matt to say, look, we're over indexing in efficiency, and we're kind of like crunching away a lot of these like super valuable components of working life and human culture and all this type of stuff. It's unfortunately inevitable that we're going to continue to do that, because every single CEO in a profit-making business in a capitalist economy is literally his or her only job description is to actually continue to maximize that. So this is an embedded imperative. So I don't think there's any other way. I had this conversation with, who is it? I forget who it was, but it was a person who was talking about the difference between a founder CEO and a person who's an employed CEO. And we're talking about the longevity of the targets that you have. And an employee CEO basically is driven by quarterly, maximum yearly targets, right? That's the rhythm. He or she needs to hit those numbers. They cannot afford to have a 10-year vision. Compare that to a founder CEO. They can have a 50-year vision, or at least a 30-year vision if they're going to hang around long enough. And therefore, they can make unprofitable decisions for now because they're thinking in the future. And therefore, they can make so-called cultural positions. Now, unfortunately, the exemplars of the founder CEOs are all like people that probably we wouldn't look at as optimal people. But you look at the likes of Zuckerberg, for instance. He is a founder CEO, and his sort of share structure means that he can say whatever he wants. Therefore, he can make $10 billion mistakes like the metaverse, hours and he can get away with it. Whereas if he was an employee, he's be sacked immediately.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation where actually the only organizations that are able to pull back away from the efficiency drive are founder CEOs or organizations that have a completely different corporate structure. So for instance, cooperatives. If you have a cooperative where every individual is a co-owner of a business, then I think maybe you'll have a different set of decisions to make. But as we are all mainly employees, the shareholders in the background, even the CEO is an employee, we have the embedded imperative of maximal optimization, and there's no getting away from that. So we need to change, we need to diversify the types of social organizations we have. Anyway, politics.
There's an interesting point about efficiency and what efficiency looks like in TA, right? So efficiency in other departments might look like your bottom line, right? I absolutely agree with you. Your finance director just looks at numbers. They want the spreadsheet to be going in the right direction. Here's more output, here's less cost, right? And that's every finance director I've ever worked with. The problem I have is that most companies that I've worked with or that I talk to people from don't necessarily understand what TA does or how it does it in enough depth when it's good. Maybe they don't know, they haven't seen good, because I always have to prove worth whenever you go in. But the number of times that you get a great TA leader will go in, they'll strip away some of that tooling. So instantly you remove that cost. You get great people who are good at the job of recruitment go in and they don't need those tools as much. It's like, I need a LinkedIn license and a ATS maybe. That's your core. I don't need bells and whistles up here because I can find people, I can convince people, and I can move them through the process. So if I look at the last place I worked, we went from a team of 9 to a team of 5 and doubled the number of offers that we made in a year. So how do you do that sort of stuff? Well, you enable the team to move fast, but you do that by, opening up the black box a little and explaining to managers, but it's a lot of effort. And I think from my side, the TA leaders aren't empowered all the time to do that. Or if you're a new TA leader, you're in a role, the impetus is to make a change, right? And that's why I worked for Workable, as you know, and one of the biggest factors in adopting a new ATS was being new in your job. If you just take a new job, you come in, you change everything because it feels like progress. It feels like you've done something. Look at the shiny thing that I have done. And then you've not configured it right and it all goes wrong.
But you can't walk into a new organization and say, I'm the sheriff here and not make a change in a way. But like, does the change need to be structural? Does it need to be technology?
Does it need?
And I think
yeah.
And then on that point of like, you had the piece when you were talking about a tool that's bought by the organization and given to you, and Hung, you're talking about efficiencies in CEO-led organizations in a capitalist system. Well, it is inevitable that the tools that we were given before, let's say Oracle, SuccessFactors, Workday, that are a much broader suite that have a talent acquisition element, are being sold at that C-suite level. We're also going to have tools brought onto us to lead the automation and lead the efficiency. So as much as like we don't want to homogenize the process of recruitment and we want to maintain that human element, I think we don't want to be following the crowd down that route, but you also need to show that you're taking some action to experiment and think about what are the problems that I'm solving with automation? How can I evidence that back? How can I show the business I'm saving money so that the business doesn't go, right, which area of the business isn't saving us money? It's TA. Great. We're going to bring in X specialist and Y specialist, and then we're going to rip out everything and start from the bone. So I think there's those overlapping issues that have existed before on those same drives of efficiency. And this is not I think this is not a wave like I can't believe you brought back that talking head. I can't remember what it's called either.
Mate, I love Tengai, and I love the animatronic heads. I think they made a big mistake by getting rid of it. I'm pro interview by animatronics.
I love Doctor Who and Tom Baker era, so it fitted in really nicely with what I want as an aesthetic.
So I think those pressures are going to exist, and it's on us to think about where can we enable things practically and actually solve problems. But then maybe there's an element where we do have to be performative to a certain level. And I shared an example before we came online, and somebody said to me, I just want a tool that tells me these are the people that I should hire, which I don't think is place where we want to be, you certainly don't want that decisioning to happen.
It's
But
interesting that recruitment goes through this, right? But you wouldn't say, I just want a tool that tells me exactly how to build this bridge. You would want someone to look over those plans, right? You want someone in that loop who knows the area. I think recruitment's one of those things that uniquely, for all the listeners, you can have a terrible recruitment experience and still get to a good result. And then what you do is, because you got to a good result, you go and replicate that everywhere. So it's kind of self-fulfilling. Maybe we're just as guilty of homogeneity as AI is as well, because we're just drowning ourselves. What a happy thought from me.
Bombshell. And we're nearly at the
Well,
half-hour mark.
yeah.
And maybe come to some closing thoughts from you both, and then I'll kind of wrap us out. Hung, what should people be looking for? Like, do you know what? We're coming towards that point of the year. And I said before we went on, like, this is not an echo chamber episode, right? And I think we've kind of done a good job of that. But we're coming towards the end of the year, and now we're going to ask people what they should look for in 2026. We're not going to do that. But from all the conversations you're having at the moment, Nate, when we're thinking about actual application, what should people be wary of? Where have you seen things that are successful? Any like sound bites to finish on?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm just going to go with a statement which I think is important. So the hobby horse I'm currently riding on is this concept of, look, AI is gonna speed things up. It's gonna make you more efficient, quote unquote. Like it or not, this is the system we're in. However, we need to be very conscious as to what we do with the time that is saved. So in other words, what happens if I do in fact save the company, 20 hours a week on this recruitment project? Where does that time go? Does it just go back into the system in some way and I have to do more work, or what? I think you need to keep what you kill. So in other words, if all TA leaders need to implement this policy internally, where they can encourage their team to start aggressively using tooling that's available to automate and become more efficient, but only do so with a keep what you kill policy. So in other words, the TA team retains the value that you've created and then can reinvest that into the stuff that the company says they care about. So for instance, we know that actually diversity and inclusion requires more time and more resourcing. Well, okay, then, if I'm able to save some more time, on interview scheduling, that time doesn't just go back to the business. I need that time back so that I can expand my talent pooling, so I can get more populations activated into the pipeline. That's what we've got to insist upon. So in other words, we have this view that, okay, the cliche is AI is going to free us from the mundane and then, we'll automatically do the higher value work. It is not going to automatically happen. We need to take the value, argue for it, and then apply it to the higher value. So we have to keep what you kill. That's my hobby horse. I would encourage all TA leaders to think about that line and start implementing it and arguing it internally.
Yeah, love that. And one quick, completely paradoxical parallel is nursery bills. The second I stopped paying nursery bills, the money just evaporated. And you have this thought that when suddenly you've freed up resource, you freed up time, that you're just going to automatically see the benefit. And that is very profound and accurate. And maybe we need some more folks out there making sure they're educating on like what you can do when you have freed up that time, how you can partner more effectively with the business, etc. Matt, come to you. Closing thoughts.
So my advice going into where we currently are, and the advice I'll give myself when I step back into the TA leadership role, is beware the normalization of the absurd. Right. So as we automate bad processes and they become normalized, every subsequent wave of innovation, it's going to get worse, right? Because bad processes are going to go faster. And they'll appear like progress. So this is this kind of emperor's new clothes thing. So I think be guarding against that for TA. And this is, I think I'm going to echo what Hung says. Keep what you kill and look. I'd be even more hunt wisely as well as keep what you kill. So look at those particular things that you want to kill. Don't go for like, I'm going to automate this chunk. I'm going to automate all of my top of the funnel. Why would you? If you've got recruiters who are great at that, give it to them. If they're going to do finding convincing better than an AI reach out, don't give it to the AI. Dear insert first name comes to that kind of thing. Where is AI valuable? Predictive modeling for workforce planning, data visualization for DEI. I've used it there. That looks great. Summarizing, NLP summarization of like candidate feedback, that kind of stuff. Great for those things. I ended up, putting together employee packs. You take the candidate CV, their interview notes, and the job description. Say, smoosh that all together and give me a hiring manager ready view of exactly this candidate. Go for it. Boom, comes back beautifully. That saves me time. That's a great time sink. It's a better level of service that I give to everyone. So there are these things which are high value kills, and the time taken. McDonald's is good. McDonald's is good and fast, right? And sometimes we all crave a McDonald's. But if you're like me, after you've eaten a McDonald's, you think, why did I eat a McDonald's? Because you can't have McDonald's every day, right? And sometimes you just crave that really nice experience. And it doesn't have to be that Michelin star if you think that's too faffy, but it can be a nice trattoria in Italy, let's say. It can be the restaurant that makes you feel at home. It can be something that is yours, and you should veer towards those experiences, because then you're going to have candidates out of your process as well. You're going to solve that. You're going to solve the too many candidates issue. You're not going to have this wave of slop, because eventually people sort themselves at the top of the funnel as well. I think Bill was right. I think Hung's right.
Yeah, agree. Look at us all wholeheartedly agreeing with each other. But I think the other thing as well here is there was such a wonderful soundbite there, but taking out of context, it's just not going to play very well, which is basically choose what you hunt. And then once you've got the kill, decide what you do with the time that you saved, which out of context makes no sense. But in context, I think wonderful analogy. And I also urge talent acquisition leaders. I'm speaking to more and more organizations every single day that are running a more embedded model where their TA team are sitting inside the business units, inside the meetings. They are benefiting from being part of that conversation and thinking about that bigger picture across talent rather than across talent acquisition. And so I think as we bridge into that area, that's a wonderful use of time. We're seeing it executed in a really, really well way. Executed, dying, kill. All of these sound bites that we're doing today. I don't know what's happened in this final 2 minutes, but seeing that executed in a really, really robust way. Then we had a guest on the show a few weeks ago, and they spoke about how they've leveraged AI. They're using our products to do so, but they're hiring more people, and they're hiring more people into their team. And why are they hiring more people into their team? Because they're winning more projects, because the quality of people they're bringing in is higher. And so increasing the output of individual doesn't mean the number of offers necessarily. Yes, it can be that. Yes, you can improve at each stage of the process, but are you raising the quality bar? Are you increasing that talent density? That's where it's at. I knew this session would overrun. I saw a couple of questions come up. I didn't throw them up on screen because I knew we wouldn't have on time, but I will ping each one of you individually on that front. And thank you, because every person bar one who joined this session stayed until the end. So yeah, thank you for sticking with us as we ran through a smorgasbord of non-typical AI topics.